Morris was elected to the City Council in 1980. He was elected mayor of the San Dimas in 1997 and re-elected every election since then. He represents the residents of San Dimas on various boards and committees for the city and the region. Kurt Morris is an attorney in private practice with an office here in San Dimas. He is a graduate of Stanford University and Loyola University Law School. He and his wife Glenda have 3 adult children, and he loves San Dimas. I'd like to introduce Mayor Kurt Morris.
Well, thank you very much for being here. I know that many of you will be hearing the same speech that you've been hearing for the last 20 years, and some will be hearing it, but you may have forgotten. That's my case. In a couple of words, I can tell you the state of San Dimas is very good. We have the real privilege of having had great stability in our employees and in our city council for many years. We have always had city council members who have been interested in the betterment of the community instead of the betterment of themselves. And sometimes there is a conflict in that. But that stability has also been in our workforce. Blaine Michaelis has been here for 19 years, will be leaving to retire at 4:30 in the afternoon on the first Friday of May. But he will be replaced by a person who has been here even longer, and that's Ken Duran, and who has trained for this job to be the city manager of San Dimas for many, many years. And we are looking forward to his service, the community, and it'll be a continuation of great leadership. We have a staff, and we are also in the situation that we have had many people who have worked for San Dimas for long periods of time. And most of the people who come to work here for long periods of time and retire. And some have retired, and some will be retiring. And we have been fortunate to be an attractive place for people to work, and we have been able to recruit and to promote from within and to do other good personnel management for years and years, and that you can see the effect of that in the effectiveness of the city government. There will be changes. We all know there will be changes because that's the constant that we have. And we are facing today challenges that local government has not really faced for many years. Some of these things have been building up and are now coming to the due bill is here and it has to be paid one way or another. Everybody reads about the pension crisis and the fact that CalPERS, that almost all of the smaller cities, at least in California, are a part of, and the California state employees are a part of, is tremendously underfunded. If you take their official version of how underfunded it is, it's probably by 25 to 35%. There are other analysts who look at that and say that is a very optimistic number, and that in fact it's much higher, the underfunded is much higher than that. There are several problems with CalPERS that caused these problems. One of them was their policy of overestimating the amount of reasonable return for a pension fund over many years. They have now come to the realization that they've been very optimistic. And one of the results of them being very optimistic is they made aggressive investment decisions. The investment decisions that they made were not appropriate for a pension fund. And they lost a lot of money. In fact, during the downturn of the early 2000s, they lost 25% of their investments. That should never happen to a pension fund. Only one person went to jail, and one committed suicide to avoid going to jail. But it's been a badly managed fund for a long time. They are now trying to get some order in it. They have started the reduction in their expected returns, and they have started to have a more conservative investment policy. The immediate effect of that is we all have to pay more. Because there was a time in the 90s when CalPERS said, you don't have to pay anymore, it's all going to be paid for by our earnings. So they encourage cities to increase their pension benefits, and they particularly encourage small cities, and many of them are around us who had police departments, to adopt the retirement of the California Highway Patrol, which was 3% at age 50. That's 3% of your final, and I think in their case it's the final year, which is another no-no for pension because they spike in that way. But it's 3% of that final number times the years of service. And so the CHP officers retiring are going to be retired a lot longer than they're going to have worked, in many of them. On average, they're going to live longer than they worked. The California system also has a built-in cost of living increase. Cost of living increases are extremely expensive. You could look at modeling a pension plan without the cost increases, without the cost of living increases. You can model that and find out a projected actuarial number for what it will cost. And you can add a cost of living increase to it, and it can increase that by 50 to 100%. So these are expensive, very expensive pension plans. Small cities that adopted those are in desperate financial condition. They are now selling pension bonds so that they'll be paying on the bonds at the same time they're paying CalPERS, because if you're underfunded on part of this, you have to have a payment plan to CalPERS in which you have to pay them 7% interest. So the idea, a lot of people are out selling these pension schemes to say, if you borrow money, you will be paying about 3% interest, and you can get 7%. You can avoid 7%. There are no easy answers to the pension crisis. We don't have an easy answer. Nobody else does. However, San Dimas never drank the Kool-Aid that pensions were free. So we did not adopt these great enhancements that many cities adopted at the behest of PERS, to say, so we had essentially a plain vanilla PERS package. So we, in the list, there's a Stanford University list of the order in which the cities in California are going bankrupt. And I'm happy to tell you that we're almost at the bottom of that list. And they're going bankrupt. This is their predictions of going bankrupt because of the PERS obligation. I was at a conference where a lady who was an eminent authority on this said, there's going to be a continued steep rise in the PERS cost for the next 8 or 10 years. And then it's going to level off at that high level for 35 years before the pension reforms enacted in 2011 actually are effective. So we all have that, we're in that bucket with everybody else. We know we're going to have increased amount of revenue that go into that bucket. We also have another area, and we have this not for retirees, we have an absolute minimum for retiree health. But many cities are faced with as big a deficit for retired employees as they are for their pensioners. So they got a double whammy. But everybody is faced with a tremendous increase in the cost of health care for our current employees. That is going up and has gone up for many years, and nobody thinks that's ever going to get down to what the cost of living is. The medical, there are two major indexes that people look at that they say there's the cost of living increase, there's the one for health care, and then there's the one for higher education, which is growing, is inflation and higher cost of higher education is growing faster than any other long-range track thing. Fortunately, we don't have to worry about the education. We don't have to worry about a lot of things, but we do have to worry about the health care for our employees. We also have other things that are increasing. Our liability, we pay for the liability, the police liability and the auto accident liability of the Sheriff's Department separately from our contract. That liability has been going up by 20, 30%, but now it is continuing to increase at about a rate of about either 5 to 10% a year. 5% if we don't want to fully fund it and we cross our fingers and hope things will get better, but about 10% if we estimate the true cost. So something that the cities as a group paid $14 million for 7 or 8 years ago now costs $30 million. And there is no reasonable belief that that is not going to increase. Our sheriff's contract itself, which is, by the way, a very effective way to provide policing in a small city, but it's going up. And one of the things that the Sheriff's Department faces is the difficulty of recruiting deputies. New people to come in and go to the academy, and so eventually that is going to get translated in that being more expensive than what it is now. We have tremendous Sheriff's Department. It's like a local police department. Captain Andy Berg is basically our police chief. We are very happy with him and his relationship with the city, and the deputies and the other staff people who work with us. We have literally no complaints. We're getting great service, but it will become more expensive because it's becoming more expensive to provide the service. There are other things that we also note, and that is that all of the contracts that we have now, anything that the city does has to be by a competitive bid contract. And the way that we do estimates. It's our engineer's estimate of what the bids will be. Well, they represent sort of past costs. So now we're in a phase where every project we have, the bids come in much higher than the estimate. Good news is we went through a period where the estimates came in lower. We rebuilt the city hall at a time when the estimates were much lower. It would probably cost 1.5 to 2 times as much if we wanted to bid that job and have it done today as when we did it. So those are compensating factors, but we are now in a phase where the increase is real and it's likely to continue for a long time because there's more competition for the contractors. Asphalt, cement, all those things that are used have greatly increased in cost. Now, I tell you all of this only to tell you then that our revenue is flat. When your revenue is flat and you're maintaining, we actually are not running a year-to-year surplus now. We have, in the last 2 or 3 years, in order to build projects like the downtown renovation, we have had to use some of our reserves. We were running at around 82% sort of cash flow reserve in our accounts. We're now down to about 76%. We would like to not go lower, but the fact is you have to invest in the infrastructure to keep it up. So revenue is very important. I don't know, and we have not considered this or talked about it, and I'm just going to mention that the state has put a limit, at least for now, on the sales tax of 10.25%. And that gives a little space for it to be increased for us. Cities have said that sales tax is going to get increased by somebody, by a vote of the people. It's going to, now the AQMD is talking about they will try to have a sales tax passed. The Metro is forever wanting to increase the sales tax for the money to go to them. Many cities have, and some put it on the ballot in 2018 and got their local sales tax increased. We get the sales tax is 1% of sales. That's what we get. That was the standard. The city of Pomona was able to get that passed, several other cities. There are now cities, Glendora is considering it, I believe, of having a special election to get the authorization to increase the sales tax up to the state minimum or the state max, because that gap is there and somebody is going to fill it, and cities may need the money more than the other people. Problem is, I think they're estimating for Glendora that it will be $400,000 to have a special election. The reason for having a special election is if you end up getting on the 2020 ballot to try to do it, or even on either of the 2020 ballots, you may be competing with a lot of other people who are trying to get it too. So we have not even talked about this increase of the sales tax, but it is a reality that many cities are saying somebody's going to do this. Sales tax in San Dimas is now under the maximum, and if we don't do it, somebody else will. But again, when we used to run elections ourselves, they cost $70,000. They now cost, the county runs them now for us, and they cost more like $150,000 to $200,000. So if we ran a special election, we'd be having to, it's like going to the roulette wheel or something. You put your money out there, spin the wheel. If you win, you don't get your money back, but you start getting this tax increase. If you lose, you're just out the money you spent for the election. So that's why when we talk about things that we're trying to do, revenue is very important. Our revenue does not increase as much as the cost of living typically. Everything else increases at least that much. So that's one of the reasons you have heard that there are discussions of trying to build a hotel in, and I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail in this because a lot of things are going on with that. But a hotel at the corner of Bonita Avenue and Cataract would produce an additional $500,000 or more in transient occupancy tax. Because the voters in San Dimas voted to increase the transient occupancy tax to 12% 2 or 3 years ago, and because of the success of the hotel and motels in San Dimas now, the transient occupancy tax is a major contributor. I believe it's over $1.5 million a year, 1.6, 1.8, depending, and this is all paid by people who are visiting. People in San Dimas, if you want to stay in a hotel or motel here, you can pay, but most people probably aren't doing that. And the advantage of that over the sales tax is we get all of that money. And it comes to the general fund, and that is a big help. We have a couple of other things that are possible sources of money. The issue last year, the big tax increase for gasoline tax, and the gasoline tax increased, and the registration that we get when we get a fee in lieu of the vehicle registrations. That will produce somewhere around $500,000 a year for San Dimas. That's primarily devoted to infrastructure and roads. Gas tax has been decreasing over the last few years for all cities, even though we have one of the great gas tax producers in the world at the Costco service station. If you've ever been there in those lines, you are contributing. But that's dropping because cars don't use as much gas. And the electric cars don't use any. So we have positives on the revenue side, and we have things that are not so positive. We're spending a lot of money. The revenue from a hotel, for example, on a 2-acre parcel, there is nothing we could get there that would produce anywhere near that kind of revenue. We could fill that property totally with fast food restaurants, wouldn't produce anywhere near that much revenue. And particularly, we would only get the 1% instead of 12%. So I know there are people who say, well, we don't need revenue, we need to have things that people want. We want restaurants, or we want to have on that property, we'd like to have a little paths for people to stroll through and things like that. Remember, that property is worth almost $900,000 an acre. So that little meandering path is to be very expensive, to say nothing of building. But I just hope that when we get to the point, if we ever do get to the point, that people will understand a city's seeking revenue is not just to have more money. It's to be able to provide the services that we are providing, and in some cases, if we have more, we would enhance the services. But that's kind of the way it is. We also have the same problem that everyone else in the world has. Not the world, in California. When the state, by their laws and by a very dubiously named proposition, got the people in California to say, what are minor crimes? A minor crime, in most people's view, is one that happens to someone else. If it happens to you, the same incident is major. But there virtually is no enforcement of people violating the law. If somebody walks down through the parking lot and breaks every window and looks in just on spec if they can find something they could steal, and the police catch them, it's the catch and release. They get required, they cite them in San Dimas, at least they book them, so there's some inconvenience. Most of the people in most areas are cited and said, will you please come to court on this day? Most of them don't, because they know there's no consequence to not going. On the other hand, there's no consequence to going, because they're not going to be punished Well, there's an effort to change that, because a lot of people now say, wait a minute, this constant theft. And one of the things that helps is that the center of this is San Francisco. There is a street in San Francisco called Lombard Street. It's a very crooked street that everybody, goes, and sometimes they'll drive down and they walk down. And so there's a parking lot up above to accommodate that. If you park your car there, you're virtually assured it will be broken into, because it happens all the time. The Chronicle newspaper, they're there with TV cameras basically set up and filming people breaking into the cars. Call the police say, why come? We can't do anything about it anyway. So the rate of property crimes, small property crimes in San Francisco is totally out of sight. But it's like, well, we don't want to put people in jail. Costs too much money, costs whatever. So some police agencies and others have tried to have an initiative approved, and they tried to have it approved for the 2018 general election. And this would have reversed some of the most egregious changes. But for some reason, a number of counties, registrars, were not able to process those. Even though they were all turned in time, they were not able to process them, the signatures, and verify them, and in time to qualify for the 2018 election. So they had plenty of signatures when it was done, and there's no penalty for doing that. I mean, that's the job of the registrar, but there's no penalty if they just choose not to do it. So they get it qualified for 2020. Jerry Brown files a lawsuit against them. I think he did this personally. And it is that this initiative doesn't have enough signatures. It has the number that the Secretary of State told them they needed by the calculations, and that's the person who tells you how many you need. But they say, no, because this is actually a constitutional amendment, and therefore, not enough signatures. So there's a lawsuit on whether to even reach the 2020 ballot. In the meantime, crime, minor crime is rampant everywhere. In fact, we probably have less on the statistics, Andy, than anybody around, but it's still a problem, correct? So that's an annoyance that people are having to live with, and it's not a good thing. We also have a threat, and this threat has been coming on for quite a while. In California, there has always been housing issues. And for going back many years, every city is required to have a housing element approved. And a lot of cities follow that. The way the housing element is created is the Southern California Association of Governments, called SCAG, they determine how many building units you ought to build over the next 6 or 7 years that your housing element will apply. Well, one time we had to build, I forget, thousands. And the people from SCAG, it was, we can't believe we do this. And it was, I guess it was going to be houseboats on Benelli Park, because they counted all of Benelli Park as being places that we should count in our calculation of land available to build houses. And they also didn't consider the mountains, the hills. But we were able we actually did a very good job. Our planning staff did a great job. We have an approved housing element that will go to 2022. So we're not on the list that the governor invited to invite. He summoned. Some of the cities that he summoned, he said, we're not talking to you. Huntington Beach in particular. But the state has said, this is not working. We are way short of the number of houses we need, and it's at all categories. It's for people who are above the poverty level, and it's also for people who are at the poverty level. And this is now a state issue. So that we are going to take away from cities who don't build housing. We know that you've all figured out ways to not build housing because none's been built, particularly for low and moderate income. So, and the governor has explained to people, does it publicly, and he explains, and Senator Weider explained to council people and city managers. Well, we know that city councils have a difficult time approving the housing that you should be approving because you have constituents who will vote you out of office if you do these things. So we are going to help you out by imposing it from the state. And they have started. The people who don't have housing elements that are approved, some of them are being sued. There are 2 lawsuits, and the lawsuits, one may not have been filed yet, but one of them is against Huntington Beach. And Huntington Beach, they had a plan, it was approved. When the buildings started to be built, the residents were outraged. And they said, no, we're not permitting this. So the city council, I think the fear of being lynched or something, they said, okay, we're not gonna abide by our plan. So and they were sued. And they won the lawsuit on the basis that they are a charter city. And they managed to get it determined that housing is a local issue, and if you are a charter city, the state law would not apply to you. Well, they've made declarations in the state that housing is a statewide issue. It doesn't matter if you're a charter city. So they have sued Huntington Beach again, and that lawsuit is progressing. Huntington Beach is fighting it, but it's only in the beginning stages. Another city was the city of Encinitas in San Diego County. They actually have never had a housing element approved, and nobody ever really bothered them. And one of the things that happened there is they had a vote, an initiative vote, where it took away the right of the city council to rezone property, residential property, to a higher density. That required a vote of the people. So, and there have been 2 efforts to rezone, both have been defeated. They're now, the last one included actually a plan that they hope the state would approve as a approved housing element. So the net result of all that is they really have 2 test lawsuits. This one against Encinitas will test the issue of whether the voters have the right or the state has the right to determine how many houses you have to build and in what categories. The penalties that will happen for people who do not build the housing is they will lose all of their transportation money. That's the threat from the governor. That would mean we would lose what we used to get in the gas tax. We would lose certain other things that we get from the state for transportation. And we would lose all of this new money, the roughly $500,000 a year. We would lose all of that. That's the threat. And the kind of density that they're talking about, that they don't consider to be high at all, is probably 5 times what St. Dimas has ever had anything built under. That's coming. The governor has said it publicly in everything he said it to the mayors that he met with, that were summoned. He's going to say it to the other mayors that he's going to invite. Weiner has said it to everybody who has talked to him. Housing is the issue that the state needs to deal with. The governor and I are going to do it. And cities, we're going to help you, because if your local voters won't vote for it, and they won't vote for you if you have the housing element, we're going to impose it on you. So we could, if this goes along, and it may very well, San Dimas will look a lot different in 10 or 12 years than it looks now. The population will increase, it'll be mostly in rental housing, a third or more of it subsidized, because there is a housing crisis. And the state says, we are not going to continue with what has not worked. Now, they quickly forget that there used to be a mechanism for cities to build low-income housing or to provide low-income housing. It was the redevelopment agency. Because a part of the money for the redevelopment agency had to go to housing, and a part of that, excuse me, had to go to low-income housing. And we actually built some subsidized housing in San Dimas. It's in the Avalon Apartments. There are units there that we paid from redevelopment agency housing funds. We paid a buy-down. And so those will be subject to restricted rents for 54 years. It's a good solution. It doesn't, I mean, people are very concerned about public housing in general, about what it does to communities, things like that, but it's going to be there. Sooner or later, that's coming. Coming even sooner is the gold line. The gold line, we had a meeting with the, we were summoned, I think, to this too. Would you say, Blaine? More or less. We were invited, but I was invited first. And I said, yeah, I'd go meet with them and with the construction authority. And then once they had that me lined up, then they invited Blaine and Larry Stevens. And we went over and they told us kind of how things are. And it is that they got $90 million from Metro, the commitment. We don't have to worry about it. They say they don't have to worry about it. Metro hasn't figured out where the money's coming from, and we have the feeling that cities may be the source. But they got $90 million to finish the gold line to Pomona. Nobody wants to be the end of the line station, except maybe Pomona. Laverne certainly did not want to, and that's what the plan had been, was to build it to Laverne. And then they also say, nobody wants to be the penultimate station either, because this is going to be big, bad problems. But anyway, they have that. So they expect to start construction probably by about 2022, I think, on some parts of it. First thing they're going to do is move the freight rail to the north side of the right-of-way. And then they're going to build, and in San Dimas, in the infinite wisdom of the California Public Utilities Commission, the intersection at Cataract and Bonita will be severely impacted by having the light rail running at grade. The solution for that is to build a wall on which the train will run. And the wall will start at about UCLA. It will reach its highest point as it goes over the intersection at Bonita and Cataract. And then it will come back down and get back to grade level just before it gets to San Dimas Avenue. It will be 28 feet. That wouldn't include the sound walls that may have to be built. And it doesn't include the electrical system for the train. It will be 16 feet where it goes over what used to be Monte Vista, which will be changed, which will be closed, and there will be a walkway under it. So, and on the north side, it will be a vertical wall. This will be, probably, we will have to rethink, the people who are here and running things in those days, then we'll have to rethink our graffiti abatement expenses, because people are looking at that. That's the greatest canvas in the world for the, and graffiti will be a real priority there because it'll be a great place for it. That, however, is going to happen. They anticipate that the construction will be finished in 2025, and sometime in probably 2026, they will turn it over to Metro for the testing and everything that goes. The people building the goal line is the Goal Line Construction Authority. They will not operate the goal line. The goal line is operated by Metro. So when they finish building it, it'll move over and it'll be Metro. So we're going to have that, whether we like it or not, but it is going to change the character of San Dimas because it literally is bigger than the Berlin Wall and wider, and it's just a monster addition to the city, and it just splits the part west of the railroad tracks and the part east of the railroad tracks are going to be, it's going to be difficult to keep them tied together. We also know that we have a homeless problem, and that's an issue with us, and it's an issue with cities everywhere. And money has been raised with Proposition H. It's not nearly enough to deal with the problems. And I think the people who know something about homelessness realize money will not solve the problems. There are many problems that create the homelessness, and so it's a continuing problem. Nobody's found an effective way to deal with it, but a lot of people are trying. And they're trying, but the state is saying, once again, you're putting a Band-Aid on the problem. You need to build permanent housing for the homeless of some form, shelters, whatever. You need to build something so that they can have a permanent home. That's not easy because some of the people who live on the streets don't want to be restricted to the conditions of living in a home of any kind. So that's, who knows where that will go. The state also understands that no neighborhood wants to have a shelter, and so maybe they'll have to tell us where to put it so we won't have to get voted out of office for doing it. We have some good news. The redevelopment agency in San Dimas relied to some degree on its financing for bonds, like all redevelopment agencies did. But if you were, typically the way San Dimas operated is the city would advance money to a certain point, and then bonds would be sold, and those bonds, the bond proceeds would reimburse the city and also provide money for the redevelopment agency to do the things that it did. We ended up with, I don't know the exact number, maybe $13 million in city loans. A lot of those city loans were for the refurbishment of the Walker House. All of our city loans have been approved for repayment. We've gone, and this is a big process, but they've been approved. Problem is, there is no money now. There is money coming in because the tax increment still comes to the redevelopment agency or the successor agency until the debts are paid off and it goes out of business. So we will be receiving some really one-time money, whether it'll be, and it's actually, they're going to allow us 4% interest, correct? So this is a substantial amount of money, but it's still one-time money. So hopefully it will be spent very wisely when it comes in. But that's good news. And I have to say, Ken Duran spent a major part of his time for a while becoming an absolute expert on dealing with the Department of Finance on redevelopment issues and getting our money back, and he did a tremendous job. And we are all grateful for that. And now he's going to benefit from it because Well, he's the city manager, there will be this money, a windfall, right? Not really, but the one thing that's good about it, that's really good, is that that means that the redevelopment agency paid for the refurbishment. Actually, it's not refurbishment, everything that we did with the Walker House. They paid a lot of money because it cost a lot of money to restore historic properties. And we get the Walker House, which we call the Walker House Park, and the Department of Finance, part of the deal was parks to be transferred to cities. So we have the Walker House, and we're going to get back the money that we advanced to make it possible. We also have another thing that is an asset that a lot of people are not totally aware of. The Housing Authority for the City of San Dimas owns a mobile home park. And we bought this mobile home park with truly creative financing. We didn't have any money for down payment, so people who sell bonds, they sell them in tranches, and so that we actually paid less in the first few years, and then the payments went up because different maturities of bonds. I mean, they really did a good job putting that together. But we now have the mobile home park. It has been purchased really in the long run. We had, for security, the Housing Authority had to pledge either a quarter or a half of our set aside, of our redevelopment set aside fund. We had to pledge that in case the payments couldn't be made. But of course, before they will sell you any bonds, they make you borrow enough money to make the first 6 months payments. So we have two big reserve funds, one for maintenance and one for that. And the bonds are coming close to being paid off. Ken probably knows the exact date that they'll all be due. But when that's done, that is a source of money for San Dimas to be able to continue doing things we've done we did with redevelopment money, and we've done with block grant money. And part of those programs are to assist people who qualify based on income to do things to properly maintain their homes. And these are homes in neighborhoods throughout the city, and they can get things like roofs, they can get remodeling. What it really does is we use this housing money for the benefit of that individual, but the benefit is to the entire community. Because if somebody is living in a house and they cannot maintain it because they don't have the financial assets to do it, it becomes a problem. So that's a resource that we're going to have into the future based on an investment made by the City Council almost 20 years ago. In addition, we are able to, as a part of our housing program, we are able to, people who qualify are able to get a reduction on their rent that's paid for basically by the park, by the Housing Authority from its revenue. That has been a really good thing for us. The increases it is subject to the same mobile home accord that all of the mobile home parks in San Dimas are subject to, but we have not increased the space rent at the same rate that some others have. There are a couple of parks actually in the city who have not increased the rents as much as they could and still be in compliance with our accord. We've had an accord in existence for a number of years. It limits the amount of increase that can be applied. It has worked very well. It was worked out between the city, the residents, and the park owners, and it has worked well. And that continues to be an asset. We also, the Housing Authority, when redevelopment was closed down, all of the Housing Authority elements of it were transferred to the cities. So our housing authority in the city owns the 12 apartments above the hardware store. It owns the vacant lot at the corner of Monte Vista and First, where we're planning to build a probably moderate income rental unit there that will be a replica as close as we can get it without the fact that it's going to fall down to the house that was there. So the redevelopment agency owns very little. We have very little left. We sold the agency sold the property at Euclid and Bonita, and we now have Bonita and Cataract left. And plus one tiny piece of property that is probably not good for anything except to put a monument on or something. And it's on the corner of, it's on the west side of Cataract, south of Bonita and the railroad tracks. So things are good in San Dimas. They really are. But there are challenges to maintaining the kind of the character of this community that people like so much. Our population actually dropped, at least the count dropped, between the 2000 census and the 2010 census. There's really been very little growth. Who knows, the count may find out that we're no bigger now than we were in 2000. But there are challenges on the horizon. The ones that will change have more chance to change the complexion, not the complexion, actually, the physical view of the city will be what the state requires on us, how much high-density housing we have to build in the next, or has to be built over the next few years. One of the things the state has done us a real favor with, though, they have these really draconian things. Senate Bill 35, which is an expedited approvals. If you don't approve them within 90 days, they're approved as submitted, and the densities are much higher than we have, and they're really not good. I think only one project in the state has been built under that, because they also put into it that prevailing wages have to apply. And it's the sort of general consensus that you can't build housing, particularly low to moderate income housing, and pay prevailing wage, which is about 30% more than it really would cost otherwise. They are also proposing to put that in Senate Bill 50, which is the other one that could be a big deal, because they only have to change a couple of words, and the Bonita Cataract property would be subject to it. They just have to change that it's now limited only to things that are zoned residential, and you have to have weekend service, transit service. And without the weekend requirement, the weekday requirements, the bus stop in the park and ride would qualify as a high intensity transit use. So there will be challenges. I think we have people in place, and who will hopefully, as time goes by, will be up to those challenges, and I'm sure they will. And it's a great privilege and pleasure to be part of the city government in San Dimas, and I think we appreciate all of you and the people. This is a great community. I think we always need to remind ourselves also, we have a great school district, which is very important. And we have a tremendous relationship with the school district. The superintendent, the board, the principal at San Dimas High School, everybody that we deal with, the city deals with this school district. It's an excellent relationship, and I think both the district and the city add benefit to our residents by that kind of cooperation. So we appreciate it, and we're happy. Now, I've spent more time than they allocated to me. So if anybody has any questions that you'd like to ask, I guess I have time for one. Yes, ma'am.
Any positive movement on the Via Verde Shopping Center?
You know, I had that on my list, and I didn't want to finish on a downer. But let me tell you about the problem. That center is a serious problem. And the city has very few tools to deal with the problem. Code enforcement can be used if the level of maintenance, everything related to it drops too low. But code enforcement is not a very effective tool. It takes a lot of time, and courts are not always willing to say that something is as bad as we think it is. And so that's not an easy solution. If it gets really bad, that's what we have to use. That's the basic tool we have to use. The owner of the property is difficult to deal with. We've had meetings with him. He actually came out with his team. We had some residents from Via Verde. We had the city, and he mentioned that's his best property. But he is difficult, but we can't tell him how to manage his property. And so he raises the rent when he should be lowering it, when we would think he would be lowering it so he could attract tenants. We can't do anything about that. Centers like Via Verde are having problems all around our region and all around the state. That center was built as a part of a master plan for the whole Via Verde area. And that master plan contemplated a lot greater population in Via Verde than is actually there. And when it got time to build the condominiums around that would have been around the center, they were approved in accordance with what had been the zoning and everything as a part of the master plan. And there was a referendum, and it was defeated. So you have a center now that has a very low traffic count, that people looking around now, there are a lot better places to invest your money if you're going to start a business. It's the owner is either unable or unwilling to do any significant improvements. What it would take, I think, to make anything work there is you'd have to have somebody who would come in with a lot of money and was willing to promote it and to try to fix it up on speculation to make it attractive even to vacancies. If you come in now and if you're looking for a place to locate a business and you look at all those vacancies, would you invest your money there? I think it's very, very difficult. A lot of centers like that are becoming high-density residential. A lot of cities have made that decision. I don't think that's even on our radar that we would think of doing that, and I don't think the residents in Via Verde would like to have that. But the reality is there's not much hope for that center. And it may just continue to get worse and worse and worse because there are so many places that people can invest because there's vacant, available retail in centers that are working. So we've been working on that for years. The staff worked a lot of time. We tried to convince the owner to do things. We helped them with, they would say, well, we want uses that are not permitted. And we said, tell us the uses you want. We can always amend the code if they're okay. They don't give us. They talk about signage. We say, we'll work with you. That's the end of the conversation. So with the present owner, I don't see, and the present owner owns a majority of it. Vaughn's is owned by the Albertsons, whatever the company is, and the various pads are, some of them are owned by other people, but we look at that in frustration. I know the people who live there look at it in frustration, who live around the area, but we really have very few tools. In fact, we have none. He keeps it, the maintenance and everything is good enough that we would have a difficult time with code enforcement. Any other questions? I got 1 minute. Yes.
What is the status on the Walnut Creek project?
I beg your pardon?
The status on the Walnut Creek project in Liberty?
It's being built in accordance with the plan that was approved quite a while ago. They're starting to do some of the work on it, but it's everything that they're doing. Conservancy and Conservancy owns most of it. We own a small part, but it's basically the trails and maybe the demolition of some of the buildings. Maybe you or Ken knows a little bit more.
It's just, maybe we could talk to you after a little bit. There's some specifics, but it's just to implement and do the project in the group. You know, there's been some confusion, like maybe it's more than that. It's not. It's just simply.
Is it still going to the park, the local park, or the Dara?
No, it's going to the plan. Maybe we can show it out and give you the details. It's just not going through the process.
Okay, anyone else? Sir.
Mr. Mayor, this morning at 4:40 a.m., I was woken up by Metrolink again. And every 20 to 30 minutes after that, they continually wake us up. We had a state senator come here and said that he was delaying the start of schools because students needed to be able to sleep in. We have schools that are also having the same noise levels around them. I'm not so concerned with the light rail coming in as far as noise levels, but I am concerned about the density that might be required, which you had mentioned in your speech. What do you think the population of San Dimas will be in 10 years, and how much do you think it would be an optimal population? I'm sure there's a disparity between those two numbers.
Well, I think optimal is right now. Yeah, probably that's not realistic, but the fact is, I don't think anybody can guess, and I don't want to be a person who says, "Oh, the sky is falling." But I wouldn't be surprised that in 10 to 12 years, the city population would increase by more than 25%. Because if we have until 2022, we're relatively safe because we have a plan. Now, the truth is, on our housing element, we have not produced anywhere near the amount of housing that we were assigned to produce in San Luis. And I believe it, that when the mayor, or when the governor and Mr. Wiener, who is the chair of the Senate Housing Committee, I think we have to consider that when they say this is a state problem and we're going to solve it, regardless of cities, I think they can find places to build. And when you can put a lot of population when you're building 4 stories and 120 units per acre, things like that. And don't have to have any open space or anything else. That if you build it to their standards, it's not going to look like San Dimas. I don't know, just as this is a problem throughout the country. Minneapolis eliminated single-family zoning in Minneapolis. That immediately, and they did this within the last 2 or 3 months, that immediately made it possible for every single lot to have a triplex or the existing unit plus a duplex. So this is the people are housing is an issue. Thank you all. I'm sorry I took so much of your time, but thank you.